Guys, Brian here from Starlite Pulp. Thanks so much for checking in with us tonight. And tonight, my guest is somebody who I'm a big fan of personally, and I kind of consider him in many ways kind of a modern day, kind of Kerouac with a guitar chronicling across the U.S. on the blue highways. And he is a country and rock and roll crooner, an outstanding guitar man, and a bit of a musical historian in a lot of ways, and also an author. So he's also probably the musician that I can think of, besides maybe the Rev, of showing up and performing in a nudie suit or a traditional country western suit, which I appreciate. So, and that's something to be celebrated. So we got Deke Dickerson here with us tonight. So Deke, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely appreciate it. So Merle Travis, right, known for Cannonball Rag, 16 tons, 9-pound hammer, and a bunch of other stuff. You kind of co-authored a book with him. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the deal is I knew his daughters. They live here in Southern California, and I was after them for several years that there was no Merle Travis book, which I thought
Mhm.
was a travesty. I thought somebody needs to write the Merle Travis book. And Merle was a pretty gifted writer himself, and so it was always kind of weird. Like, why didn't Merle write his own book? But he was also a really, really bad drinker. So when I approached the daughters, eventually they let me into this storage unit that they had up near Santa Barbara. And it was just a ton of stuff: photos, memorabilia, letters, everything you could think of. And in that storage unit, we discovered that Merle had started to write a raw, unedited autobiography. And there was about 80 to 100 pages of autobiographical writing.
Oh, cool.
And so we took that and we pitched that to BNG Books. That was kind of the selling point: is, hey, we found this undiscovered, unpublished Merle Travis autobiographical material. And then I wrote the rest of it, which took me a little over 3 years. And I interviewed 75 people and traveled all over the United States to track down photos and things like that. So the end result is a 480 page book that I hope will be the last word on Merle Travis.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. That sounds very cool. And all right, awesome. So is that out already?
It will be out November 22nd.
Okay.
We've had some false starts. It was delayed about a year and a half because of COVID. And
Gotcha.
then once the publisher decided to go to the publisher, or go to the printer, all of a sudden there's a worldwide supply chain problem with printing. Amazon had bought all the cardboard factories to make boxes, and so it was really hard to get hardcovers made. So we had to wait about another 7 or 8 months because of that. But it will finally be out November 22nd, and I do
Excellent.
actually have a proof copy in my hand.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so yeah, and just to piggyback that, as a publisher here at Starlight Pulp, uh, I belong to we belong to the CLMP, which is the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses. Anyways, we kind of go back and forth on email with some stuff, and there's actually the supply chain shortage you spoke of. There are some publishers that are having to push things back because they don't have any paper.
Yeah.
Here we are trying to put books out, and literally there's no paper. So yeah, the pandemic has done a number on that. Awesome. Well, you said November 22nd, yeah?
That is correct.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, good. And it's called 16 Tons: The Merle Travis Story. So definitely look for that, guys. Okay, so one of the things that I admire about you, but also something that we have in common here, just kind of in general with the guests that we have on, is that you really kind of are passionate about what you do, and you have a real kind of understanding of the history of where the music comes from. And as you travel around the country, you oftentimes kind of almost chronicle what for most people would be relatively obscure names, which I think is awesome, and really cool. So so obviously you love music and you love playing music, but you also love the history of it. So what's something that for example, I know there was a story recently regarding Buddy Holly, right?
Yes, Texas Tech brought me out to Lubbock to do a performance and also like kind of a talk
Right.
presentation thing there at the college. And of course, being in Lubbock, I had to go visit all of the Buddy Holly historical sites there.
Of course. And yeah, that was the Electric Guitar in American Culture Conference. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, that was an honor to be a part of that.
Yeah. So what was that like?
Well, it's an interesting thing whenever you go to a college campus or a museum or whatever, because you never really know what it's going to be like. But the people there at Texas Tech were great because man, they had they had guys that were giving presentations on the Allman Brothers guitars and actually going into the history of all the various guitars that Dwayne Allman played and whatnot. And so my talk just kind of laid right in there with what they were doing, and that's nice because sometimes I'll come in with these sort of presentations that have to do with country music and weird, like you said, obscure musics, and it doesn't really fit the program. But it was really good there because man, they were all about it. They thought it was great.
Very cool. Okay. And so I know that when you go on the road, like I mentioned, you kind of chronicle a lot of the things that you cover, and oftentimes you visit some of the grave sites in areas where a musician has passed, and that sometimes it might be an obscure one, sometimes not. But um, what are like as you've gone around and it's been decades now, is that something that you really try to hit and you think a lot about beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. People are strange about graveyards. Some people really don't like them at all, and they think it's
Right.
really weird why anybody would want to go to a graveyard. And for me, I always feel that connection to the past. Like for instance, Richie Valens is buried very close to me. He's buried in San Fernando Mission Cemetery, and whenever I go there, not only do I think, "Wow, the body of Richie Valens killed in the plane crash with Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper is laying right there," but I also think, like, man, this is where they took his body after that plane crash, and I could just kind of see his family, like, and the mourning that they had of the 17-year-old kid, just barely getting started in the music biz, getting killed like that. So for me, whenever I visit a grave like that, it's always pretty profound. I always just feel the history that's all around me.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. So and recently I saw that you did something for another musician, Kyle Eldridge, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I thought that was pretty cool because that's not something that that you need to do, but it's also something that again kind of speaks to the passion and the care that you have for the music. So obviously, you ended up helping Kyle get a better guitar. But why don't you speak on that for a minute? For a minute.
Well, I'm going to write a magazine article about this. I was just talking to the guys from Fretboard Journal about this because it occurred to me that it's a pretty good story to tell. Kyle is this kid who just kind of showed up. He's from Southern Ohio, and he lives in Louisville now, Kentucky. And
Mm-hmm.
he's a little guy. I mean, he's a very small, thin kid, and he plays the ever loving snot out of the guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and he plays in the Joe Maphis style. Now, the Joe Maphis style is something that I've flirted with, but I can't really play like that. He really, really plays like Joe Maphis. And, all the other guys who play like Joe Maphis are, in their 70s or 80s or have passed on. So he's really kind of like the guy that's going to be taking that playing style into the future. And he's a kid. He just kind of works a regular job and plays local gigs and stuff, and so he doesn't have a lot of money. And I saw him play at this festival in Boston, and he was playing great, but he had this guitar that was going out of tune and it wasn't intonating. And I've kind of seen him mess around with a number of cheap guitars over the years. And it just occurred to me when I saw him play in Boston, I said, man, I got to try to do something to get him into a proper Joe Maphis style, Mosrite style double neck. And so there's a guy in Nashville who used to live out here in Los Angeles named Terry MacArthur, and he builds these custom double necks like Joe Maphis used to play. And he also makes a smaller, more lightweight version. Sure. And it's like, well, that's what Kyle needs. I have a couple of double necks. I could have given him one of mine, but I'm 6'2" and 240 pounds. Like I can handle those things. But if you put one of those on, Kyle will literally snap his spine in half. So the idea was, okay, let's do a GoFundMe and see if we can raise enough money to get him a custom double neck made by Terry MacArthur that fits his size and won't be too heavy and all that. And I was thinking, we'll let this thing run a month and we'll see how close we can get. We were trying to raise $6,000, which is what it costs to get one of these guitars made by Terry.
Okay.
And I put in some money myself and I just kind of posted it on Facebook. And man, within 4 hours, we had people, it was over the limit. He had to shut the thing down. People emailing me, how do I donate? I don't care if it's over the limit. I really wanted to. So it was kind of inspiring to see how much people really wanted to help him out. And so Terry MacArthur has already selected the woods. He started to, cut the wood for the top and the back. And he's already started on the guitar. It's really exciting. So in about 6 months, I think he's going to have this custom double neck made just for him. And he's needed it for a long time. I'm just really happy that we were able to make it happen.
Okay, awesome. And for those of us laymen out here, certainly myself included, what would you consider the Joe Maphis style?
So Joe Maphis was just a white hot country guitar player who was famous back in the 1950s and 1960s. Okay. And he started out as a fiddle player, and then he was a fiddle player that transferred to guitar. And he was known as the king of the strings because he could play any stringed instrument. You could hand him literally any stringed instrument, and he would just play the crap out of it.
Wow.
But the way that he played his electric guitar was kind of like fiddle tunes on the guitar, like really fast, like you can go to YouTube and watch Joe Maphis videos and have your mind blown. And like I said, I kind of dabbled in that. I got to play with the Collins kids who, used to play with Joe Maphis back in the 50s. And I got to play with Joe's wife, Rosalie Maphis. She just died last year at the age of 98. But I never had the right hand for that stuff. And along comes Kyle, and man, he's just blistering and he's just blazing. And it's like, wow, he's the guy. He's the guy that's going to keep this style going, into the future. So I'm really happy that we're going to get a proper guitar in his hands.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. And the double neck too, very cool. So name a place for me. Name a place for me that when you're out on the road. Now, obviously, completely your choice of where, right? So it can be Ohio, it can be Kentucky, it can be whatever. But name a place when you're on the road, food wise, that you never miss. That's just an absolute go-to for you. Go-to for you.
Man, that's hard because it'd be hard for me to list 100. Really, trying to slim down. I realized that I was really taking the food tourism thing just like a little too literally, and just kind of eating myself silly wherever I went. But I'm a big fan of barbecue, but it's hard for me to say I like one type of barbecue. I guess if I really had to pick one, I would say that North Carolina pork with vinegar sauce is my favorite. But then I really love Texas barbecue. I really love Kansas City barbecue. And man, there's good barbecue all over nowadays. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
There's a place in Chicago, the Honky Tonk Barbecue, that's a music venue. their barbecue is as good as any I've had anywhere else. So yeah, probably barbecue, but I'm trying to cut back on the barbecue. Uh, and then, of course, what immediately pops into my mind are unique places like Monell's in Nashville, where their motto is "I've eaten and I can't get up." And basically, I think it's kind of expensive. It's like $25, but it's all you can eat.
Uh-huh.
And you
Okay.
go there, and they pass around these. You sit like family style at a table with 20 people you don't know,
Right.
and they pass around these enormous tubs of food. And it's just like you just keep eating until you're sick and you just can't move. And it's so delicious. But I'm really trying not to go back to Monell's as much as I love it.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, I saw on a recent post you had. I saw something about a barbecue post, and then one of the commenters said something like, "Oh, Deke," like like you're supposed to be staying away from that or something.
Yeah, well, I was in Texas, and they took me to this good place in Lubbock. It was really tasty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, most Texas stuff is brisket, especially. Okay, so here's a question, and I ask it to all the musicians just because it's interesting to me. Because as somebody that is in the arts, the way that the industry has changed, whether it's the entertainment industry, publishing industry, certainly, and with you, obviously, the music industry, but you've been in it long enough, right, to know what it was like in, say, the 90s, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and now we're, like I mentioned to you earlier, I was actually listening to a CD of yours earlier today, which is, kind of a rarity because I don't listen to many CDs, honestly.
That's
Most of the
retro,
time,
man.
yeah, exactly. Most of the time, I'm listening to whatever's on my phone, right? And
Yep.
so how has the industry shifted in the time that you've been involved in it? And is it a good thing, a bad thing, or is it just something that needs to be adapted to?
Well, I think the digital revolution is a double-edged sword. It's equally good and bad. I mean, the good thing is that with what the digital recording you can do now. I remember, when I first started a million years ago, you had to save up a ton of money to go into a recording studio just for a few hours. And if you saved up $500, you might be able to go into a recording studio for a day or half a day, and
Right.
you try to race through all of your songs. And now for $500, you can get recording equipment software on your computer that sounds as good as any of that stuff, and you can spend all day long every day like overdubbing and mixing to your heart's content. So that sort of thing is great. And obviously, like, the digital camera on your iPhone is way better than most of the 35 millimeter
Oh yeah.
cameras that we all used to carry around. And so in that regard, the digital thing is great. However, I do remember when I first started playing music, if a new album came out, let's just say Nirvana has a new album out, right?
Right.
Early 90s. People would line around the block at the record store
Yeah.
to buy a copy of that record. And you had to own your own copy. Like there was a mental collector thing that people had back then of, yes, I want to own my copy of this new Nirvana album. And then CDRs came out, Napster came out,
Yeah.
iTunes
Napster.
came out, all these things. And then all of a sudden it was a great mental shift because people didn't really want to own things anymore. And while I can see that to the average person that is beneficial, pay $10 a month and you can literally list anything you want on Spotify. I can understand why that is beneficial. However, all of those musicians and the people with recording studios and the people with pressing plants to make CDs and vinyl, like, man, all of a sudden they were just out of luck. And
Sure.
I think that the artists, for myself especially, I remember, iTunes didn't really hurt me that much as far as selling merchandise. Napster didn't hurt me that much as far as selling merchandise. But man, when the streaming thing really took off,
Yeah.
probably 4 or 5 years ago, people just stopped buying stuff at shows, and you would have to come up with something special, like a limited colored vinyl thing that there's only 100 copies of. You'd have to come up with something like that just to get people interested in owning something again. And so, I do okay selling vinyl and stuff like that. And I still have CDs. I still bring CDs around, and people over the age of 55 will buy CDs. The people younger than that will not. But there's a whole host of professional people, from photographers to printers to musicians to whatever, who have lost so much income because of the digital revolution. That's why I say that it's a double-edged sword. It's equally good and bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was speaking with like I mentioned, Johnny Boyd a few weeks ago, and he mentioned that the streaming thing has been difficult because he does his own solo stuff also, and he was mentioning that the kind of song by song aspect that people have the ability to purchase, on an album. I want this album. I want this song, and I want this song, but nothing else. That kind of thing. Does that make a big financial difference?
Well, I'll tell you, the main thing is and especially a lot of younger people that are in their 20s and maybe their 30s, they don't understand that the main thing that has changed is the corporate profit margin. And they make a royalty from Spotify or Rhapsody or Pandora. It's literally like 0.000000001 cent. Like, wow, where can I go to spend that 0.0000001 cent?
Right.
Man, I can't wait to spend that money. Whereas, before you would get royalties and it would be like, hey, I got $234 for that. And hey, I got $472 for that. And, you'd get a couple $1,000. So the 0.0000001 cent has not made up for it. But this is the tricky thing that people don't understand is like, how there's all these boutique burger places now, like Umami Burger or whatever, where you can go and spend $20 on a hamburger and they pitch it to you like it's some super deluxe thing. The thing is, they could sell that hamburger for $6. It's just that they've baked in this incredibly excessive corporate profit margin. And that is what's changed. And that's the biggest difference with the streaming things, is that, man, the CEO of Spotify, like, he's a multi-billionaire.
Right.
He basically talked the major labels into letting him represent major label product by giving 99% of all the royalties to the artists that were on the major labels at the time. So that's where all the money goes. It doesn't go to people like you or me. So, some people don't realize just how bad the inequity has got, but I'm here to point it out. Like, man, Spotify is totally like the hip at the time. So that's where all the money goes. It doesn't go to people like you or me. So, some people don't realize just how bad the inequity has got, but I'm here to point it out. Like, man, Spotify is totally like the hip.
Yeah.
Hamburger of music. He's making money.
Yeah, I've actually heard that about Spotify. So thank you for clarifying that, because I had heard arguments similar to that, but I didn't quite understand the depth of it. So yeah, okay, that makes sense. One of the things, and this is a question, this isn't even on my pad or anything. This is just a question that just popped up because it seems relevant, because if you're not making as much money, and I don't mean you, I mean artists in general, if you're not making as much money on CDs, right, or on streams, then it seems to me like some of the shows that I've been to recently or I've looked at seem really expensive. Like, and of course, some of that is just, the band can do it, so they do it. But if you're going to make less from what you've recorded in the studio, it only makes sense that you would charge more for a show. Is that something that you've noticed, or am I off there?
Well, yes, but I'm going to point out that also for a lot of the shows that are at, like big halls or concert venues or stadiums or whatever, that the Live Nation or whoever's doing the ticket
sure
thing, they take this obscene cut. I mean, it's like it's like, no, your ticket could actually be $100, but you're paying $240 because Live Nation has to take their cut. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
So it's all kind of it's just kind of part of the new corporate world. That's the way things are structured. And I should point out that I'm very lucky because I have several thousand really dedicated fans, and I'm super lucky for that. Like they really want to help support what I'm doing. So if I go to a show and I have T-shirts to sell, well, maybe they don't want to buy CDs anymore, but man, I sell a ton of T-shirts.
That's
and
awesome.
I see that happening with a lot of artists, that they sell a lot of other things just because people want to support them. And if you come up with other creative ideas, they will step in to support you. It's just that most people are not that creating a music collection at home like they used to be. That's the main thing that's changed.
Right. Yeah, because I'm out in the Palm Springs area a lot, Yucca Valley, 29 Palms, and all that, and so I go to a lot of shows at Pappy and Harriet's, and they tend to be pretty reasonable. I mean, I paid $25 for one show, which was obviously very cheap, $35 for another, $70 for another. But then I was looking at seeing the Black Keys a couple months ago, and I think the cheapest ticket in the house was like $175 or something. It's like, whoa, so
yeah.
So, but again, that was a larger venue. They're going to take a chunk, and obviously the band's going to take a chunk of that too. But yeah, so that's just a question I had, because it just makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that you would charge more if you're not making as much as you could in other areas. So. All right, so you're kind of frozen there, Deke. I'm gonna wait for you. You'll come out.
There you are. You are.
Yeah.
So in one respect, I can understand it, because if you see a band at a club, probably it's just those four guys and maybe a merch guy and maybe a sound guy, and they just have to have 3 hotel rooms or 4 hotel rooms, and they're just traveling in one vehicle. And if you go to see the Black Keys or one of those big stadium acts, they're hauling a couple of semis. They have probably 30 or 40 people on their crew.
Sure.
Plus you have to pay for security when you get to those big places like that. So I do understand that those type of shows cost more money. But that being said, they could still sell that hamburger for $6. They just know they can. They just know they can get away with $20 because that's the new normal.
Right. I remember a quote years and years ago. I mean, I'm talking probably mid '90s, right? But it was what's his name, Billy Joe from Green Day, and he was talking about, might have been Metallica, might have been,
right?
And they were complaining about how high the ticket prices were, and Billy Joe just looked right at the camera and he said, "Just take a smaller cut, guys." And that obviously that has to play into it too at some point, right? I mean, so
right,
yeah, but
and we're also at an interesting time post COVID, because it used to be, especially like with hip hop and rap acts, and they wouldn't really tour, because they would make enough money from their, whatever, being in a video game or being in a movie or selling enough downloads or whatever. They didn't have to tour. But nowadays, every single live act is touring. And it's kind of amazing, because all the venues are just completely booked up. And
interesting.
It's a good thing in a way. But yeah, at the same time, like it'll be interesting to see if that continues 2 years or 5 years or 10 years into the
Sure.
future.
Sure. And I think some of it, I mean, I can only imagine, but I think some of it is the pandemic too, because we were so locked in for
Right.
a while there, that all we wanted to do was get out. So if it'll be interesting to see if tickets continue to sell, the way that they have
Yeah.
been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do for you guys, but yeah.
I've been super busy this year. I really can't complain. I've kept my plate full, so
That's
I'm
awesome.
happy to be back. Happy to be back to work.
Yeah, I'll bet. So you've played because you are an artist who is, and I don't necessarily know why, but you're an artist who people find, I think, difficult to label, right? It's like, is he rockabilly? Yes, but is he kind of early rock and roll as well? Yes, and but you've also got elements from all different musical styles in what you do, and so because of that, it's led to, I think, probably very interesting choices when it comes to you playing with other people, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
not easy to label. It's one of those things where you could very well open in front of a punk band as much as a traditional country western. So what are a couple of the strangest kind of combinations that you've been involved in, as a live artist?
Well, that's a good question. I got to think about that because I've gone out on tours opening up for bands like Cake, who are sort of like alternative rock, had a
Yeah,
lot of younger fans, and we went over great. People loved us. We went out on tour opening up for Mike Ness from Social Distortion,
nice.
and that audience loved us too. In particular, those Mike Ness fans are still following me around. I don't know how many
Mhm.
people say like, "I saw you for the first time opening up for Mike Ness." But probably the weirdest was Kid Rock saw us play at a party,
Uh-huh.
and he said he was going to take us on tour with him, and we were like, "No, you're not." And then about 6 months later, we get this offer to go on Kid Rock's cruise, and this is, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. It was way before he was into politics like he is now.
Right, right, right.
It was just kind of like the Kid Rock cruise featuring Kid Rock, 6 heavy metal acts, 6 rap acts, 6 country acts, and Deke Dickerson.
Right.
And so,
Right.
like I was like, well, what are we gonna do, guys? I don't want these people to kill us. And so I came up with the idea, like, look, let's just open each of our shows with a Johnny Cash song, and they're gonna love us. And that's what happened. We totally won them over.
That's
But it
awesome.
was it was a really strange crowd of people. It was like it was a lot of people from Michigan, where he's from,
Right.
and sort of like well-to-do bikers. You know what I mean? Because you
Yeah.
have to be a certain level of well-to-do to be able to afford to go on a cruise in the first place.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
then
Yeah.
but then they were all like covered in tattoos and stuff. So it was a really interesting crowd.
I'll bet. Yeah. You were, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were on Jesse Dayton's show last week or something like that.
Yeah, yep. I've
Okay.
known Jesse for a really long time.
Yeah. Funny enough, the only reason I bring that up is I've seen him live a bunch of times too, and he's played with X too, so I've seen him as a
Mm-hmm.
guitarist there too. But he I saw him opening for Mike Ness when
Yeah,
he was in the Road Kings back in the like mid '90s, I think, something like that. So
I think it was actually early 2000s because
okay,
we did the first Mike Ness solo tours, and then Jesse was after us. So yeah, I think it was early 2000s.
very cool, very cool, awesome. Okay, so in 2020 you put out Wild Wild Thing,
Yep.
which was great, love that. You also put out the instrumental with it, Besame Mucho, something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, are you? Is there anything kind of in the works, studio wise, for you at this point?
Yeah. So I should mention that I've had all these different bands over the years, and a couple of years ago, basically right before the pandemic, I decided I really wanted to put together a band with some younger guys. And I just kind of like, especially if you're doing rockabilly, it's so great to play with younger dudes who basically hop all around the stage rather than old guys like me. So I put together this band called Deke and the Whippersnappers,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a trio with no drums. Although recently we have added a drummer, and the idea was to kind of do a Elvis, Scotty, and Bill rockabilly type thing, just real stripped down rockabilly. And I've really had a lot of fun with that band, and those guys are super nice guys and really good musicians. So the Wild Wild Thing and Besame Mucho and a couple other songs were put out on a 7-inch EP, basically right as the pandemic was hitting.
Right.
And we did a video for Wild Wild Thing, which people can go check out on YouTube. That was fun to do. And we just started recording some songs for a full-length album with the Whippersnappers. So that's next up, is to get a whole album out by them. And then also I did a bunch of videos during the pandemic and a whole bunch of different styles where I played all the instruments. And
saw that.
a lot of people have been asking me to put out an album of that stuff. So I think I'm going to do a CD and a vinyl of the pandemic songs. So those two, the Whippersnappers thing and this collection of pandemic songs, will be the next two things I have coming out.
Excellent. Okay. And are you on tour or going on tour soon? Anything like that? Doing some dates?
I just got done doing a whole bunch of touring,
Right.
and the next thing that I have coming up is I'm going on the Outlaw Country Cruise West at the beginning of November, which will be interesting because the guy who puts it together, he runs the Outlaw Country channel on Sirius XM, but he really has more like roots music taste. So he put together this bill for this thing it's interesting because it's like every roots music act from the West Coast from the last 40 years. It's Social Distortion and Los Lobos and X and Lucinda Williams and Us and Big Sandy and James Intveld, and it just goes on and on and on. It's going to be a really, really fun show, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. And is that what, like a week long or something like that?
Yeah, I think 5 days. We're going from Long Beach down to Ensenada.
Okay. And so when I think, I'm obviously I'm going to mess this up in some sense, but when I think about Americana, roots music, rockabilly, certainly can, especially Southern California over the last, I don't know, few decades, the two names that stick out to me personally are you and Big Sandy. And I know that you guys put out kind of a single or a couple songs a few years ago, right?
Well, we did a Spanish split single where I did the one side and Robert did the other side. That's the only record like that I can think of. That's probably what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, you had a song about gravy.
That's right.
That's a good one.
Keep the gravy hot. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you and Big Sandy go way back? I would imagine.
We go way, 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 way back. I grew up in Missouri, and when I was a teenager, I heard about this show that was happening in Memphis that sounded too good to be true. And I want to say that it was 1988. It might have been 87 or 89. I really can't remember.
Right.
But they were doing a benefit for Charlie Feathers in Memphis. And Charlie Feathers was going to be there, as well as Jerry Lee Lewis, Charlie Rich, the Sun Rhythm section, which, had Sonny Burgess and all these other guys that were on Sun Records. Barbara Pittman, Tex Rabinowitz, Mac Vickery. It was, as soon as I heard the lineup, I was like, I'm going. I don't care. I'm going. And so I drove down there in my car that I bought for $75, and I slept in the car. But I was like, damn it, I'm going to that show. And when I went to this show, there was one other guy there who was young and kind of looked like a rockabilly guy. Like everybody else was, dressed like a redneck. You know what I mean?
Right.
Trucker hat, beard, the whole bit.
Right.
But myself and this other guy, I was like, who is that guy? He's like this Latino guy with a big pompadour.
Right.
And so we're kind of like seeing each other across the room all night. And finally I go up and talk to him. And he said his name was Robert Williams, and he was from Southern California. And at that time he had a band called the Shambles, but he was putting together a new band called Big Sandy and the Fly-Right Trio, and so that was where I met Big Sandy, and we've been friends ever since. And
Very cool.
And man, a lot of water under the bridge.
What was he in that part of the country for?
He was exactly the same as me. He saw the lineup for this Charlie Feathers benefit, and he said, "I'm going to that. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to that show." And
Right.
So we were of a like mind, where nothing was going to stop us from seeing Jerry Lee Lewis and Charlie Rich and Charlie Feathers, all in one place.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. Very cool, man. All right.
And
So,
as it turned out, I moved to California 2 years later, 3 years after that, and then of course, Big Sandy and the Fly-Right Trio were doing really well at that point. And I formed a band with this guy Dave Stuckey, the Dave and Deke combo, and we began playing a bunch of shows together. Big Sandy and the Fly-Right Trio, Dave and Deke combo, and that's just kind of where it took off for me.
Very cool. And what made you move out to California from Missouri?
I had a band. We were a surf garage band called the Untamed Youth, and we made records for Norton Records. And it was just really frustrating to try to keep that band going. We just kept losing members. Guys would join for a tour, then they would quit. And so I thought, man, we either have to move to New York City or Los Angeles. And, when I went to New York, everybody works 3 jobs and lives in like a tiny apartment. But when we toured out to California, like nobody seemed to have a job. Like that seems like a better place to go. Yeah. So that was literally why I moved out there. And a big motivating factor was I met this woman who wound up being my first wife. So, I moved out there and hooked up with her, and I just have stayed out here ever since.
Awesome. Very cool, man. Well, hey, so we're gonna go ahead and stop it here. We're at about 45 minutes, but I do want to I do want to point out real quick to everybody, if you have the opportunity to see Deke live, do it. He's a wonderful showman, and obviously the book is coming out November 22nd, right? That is 16 Tons, the Merle Travis story, and Deke and Merle Travis obviously are the authors in that. So if you have the opportunity, pick that up as well. With regards to Starlite Pulp, submissions are closed for right now until the next issue. So don't submit anymore. We're good to go there. We're putting the stories together for the first edition, which is coming out in December. And we got merch on the site and everything else. Come by. And otherwise, I appreciate you guys coming out. And thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to talk to you.
You too, Deke. Hang out for a minute.
In this topsy